can start off and kick off. Welcome to everybody, and specific warm South African welcome to Sarah. Morning in her world that's joining us. Sarah and myself know each other for the past 2 years, and have had several conversations. She's famously, most probably known for the work that her late father did in terms of Millionaire Next Door, and her own work then on the next Millionaire Next Door. And really a great read, and so much wisdom in the book itself. And then specifically, we work together in terms of the work that she does in data points and her approach. And I really appreciate that time to come and spend some thoughts with us in terms of specifically the sharing with us the approach to looking at our clients and how they engage and create their own world around finances. But I think the unique approach that Sarah brings to the table is her approach from specifically that of industrial psychology and looking at competencies, which is unique most probably compared to some of the other products and approaches that's in the market. And then I think the other thing that I appreciate of her work is it's also validated in terms of the quality of the work as such. So Sarah, welcome. And in terms of structure, Sarah will share some thoughts with us, and then we'll open the floor for a discussion and learn from each other in terms of the conversation. So thank you very much for everybody joining again, and then specifically Sarah, for you, over to you.
Sounds good. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for allowing me to barge into your meeting. And I hope that I can share a little bit, like you said, about just, our background and kind of philosophy around how clients manage their financial lives. That's really kind of the focus of what I thought we could talk about. And then absolutely would love to hear questions. And I'll share a couple of slides if that's okay. And then yes, we'll kind of jump in. So let me share my screen here really quickly, and we'll go from there. So I come to the financial services world from the industrial psychology world. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is going, again, if you know anything about industrial psychology and applying psychology to the workplace, some of this might sound familiar. But otherwise, I'll try to keep it really light so that we don't get bogged down in some of those areas. But the way that we sort of view financial management, really particularly of your clients, is that they have certain jobs to do. They have jobs that are, that they weren't selected for, that they may or may not have the competencies to do, that they may have no interest in doing. And so we really view the advisors that work with us and the financial planners and coaches almost as executive coaches to their clients. In addition, of course, to all the other things that they have to do for their clients from a financial planning perspective, how can they help their clients be really good at this job? And so that's really our kind of focus at Data Point. So, a job really refers to activities that you do all the time. If you think about the job that you have or the jobs that your clients have, they have similar activities that they're doing. They do these tasks over and over again. And when we think about managing finances, again, the way that we've come to this world, if you will, is that there are two sort of distinct jobs. One is managing your household finances in general. That's a job that has multiple success criteria. So if you think about the definition of a job, success in that job leads to demonstrable outcomes for the household, such as being able to retire or saving for college or something like that. Performance in that job can be affected by other members of the team. So think about the household as a team unit, if you will, using that analogy again from an organization. So my success on the job might be affected by my spouse or my children or something like that. And so not only of course, is managing your general finances a job, but also investing. And investing is a very specific job as well. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So that's sort of our perspective at Data Points, is that each of these components are actually jobs. And that kind of helps explain why not everyone does this job well, right? Not all of your clients are equally able to follow plans that you put in place. They're not equally able to watch the market go up and down and remain calm and really keep on the same track that they were supposed to be on related to their investments. It explains a lot. It helps us understand why it is that all of our clients aren't the same. You can kind of think about this. Again, I use the example as a financial planner. I know many of you kind of have a lot of different hats that you wear in terms of the work that you do. But if you think about the interest, the knowledge, the experience that a financial planner has, we put interests up there because a lot of us don't have that interest in, knowing the nuts and bolts of everything that's happening related to our finances. Do your clients have those same skills? They don't. They don't necessarily have those same experiences, skills, etc. They have really different and unique personalities and experiences that they bring to you as they're trying to, accomplish goals. So again, we're kind of looking at this as, we consider the financial professionals that we work with almost like executive coaches. And if you're helping a leader, let's say, perform well on the job, you're looking at the competencies of that job. Does my client have those competencies? And if not, how can I help them improve in specific areas? And so we use the science of industrial psychology. This is Office Space. That we always have to use this here in the US. It's a movie where they bring in the organizational development team to right size the organization and start firing people. That's really not what that's, kind of a funny one related to what industrial psychologists do, but really it's applying science to the workplace, applying psychology to the workplace. And so what we've done at Data Points is we've applied the science of industrial psychology and psychometrics specifically to the study of what your clients do. And so we've analyzed jobs. We've looked at what the household CFO does. We've used task analyses. We've created, again, a competency model, which we're going to talk about in a minute, specifically related to general household financial management and investing management. And then we've created assessments to measure those competencies. Again, a lot of what we do here is also informed by research, certainly that began back with my father's work on The Millionaire Next Door. It was really the beginning of examining what it took to manage your financial life well. One of the criticisms of that particular book was that it only looked at millionaires or only looked at successful people. But in fact, if you look at the research, it actually compared individuals that were good at the job, which were called prodigious accumulators of wealth, to those that weren't so great at it. They weren't able to transform their income into wealth, those under accumulators of wealth. And so from that research, as well as academic research, we did multiple studies looking at what were the tasks that someone had to sort of perform if they were managing their household life. So this is, again, specifically related to general household management or financial management. There was a paper, and I can link that later, send it through if you'd like. You can take a look at that. Looked at the critical tasks, what was really important to actually transforming income into wealth. And again, I'll flip through these quickly, but ultimately we came up with a competency model. And this is the building wealth model. It is specific to general household management. There's 6 competencies that individuals, again, or rather I should say financial professionals, can help clients improve upon. Each of these factors are related to net worth, regardless of a client's age or income. So in other words, they add incrementally to the prediction of that success factor. Likewise, we did the same with our competencies of investing success. So John Grable at the University of Georgia, as well as others on his team, we worked together to create this, again, competency model of successful investors. We did this specifically to address some of the key criticisms of assessing psychological risk tolerance, particularly that it wasn't really capturing things like the emotional side of investing. So that's, again, one of the ways that we help to understand how clients are performing on that job, and then also inform the financial professional on how they can help their client improve. So I'm happy to go into more about either of those tests. Happy to stop for a second and answer any questions. Probably thrown a lot at you, but really I'll kind of summarize with this slide. When we think about how we're helping clients, ultimately, if we can help understand what their competencies are, understand what those success factors are for each job, where your client is today, and then guide them based on that sort of model, if you will. That's really how we view financial success at Data Points, and how the advisors that we work with tend to use our assessments as well. So I'll pause there for a moment and answer questions or see if there's anything that wasn't terribly clear, just with that quick overview.
Thanks, Sarah. And anybody that wants to ask something or delve into what Sarah said, you can just put up your hand and unmute, and then you can go ahead. So what questions have you got? What struck you? What came up for you? What are you curious about? So perhaps to open the floor, Sarah, the one thing that I was thinking about as you were presenting, and actually it's not something that struck me previously, was the one thing is, what is the competencies that I need to be a successful investor? And then the other part is, at least if I'm in a role, I must have a vision and where I must go, which most probably can sit somewhere between focus, etc. Is how do you see that relationship with, what is my values? How important is that, and where does that sit? Because at least I must know, I'm happy in this job, and where do I want to go? So that was the one thing that came up for me while you were talking.
So in terms of thinking about in a role or in a job, you typically have a vision that's either set by the organization or that you're developing yourself. Is that kind of where you were going with that?
Yeah.
Well, I certainly see that overlap with a lot of the work here in the US that, for example, George Kinder is doing, or even I think the Money Quotient group here in the US, related to ensuring that the work that's being done by a financial professional is aligned with the client's overall goals for their life, right? So this isn't necessarily addressing that piece. I would think that, again, and you can see this when you look at the research related to executive coaching, that so long as that goal is articulated and adopted by the individual, the work on improving their competencies, so to speak, or their buy-in to the process is much higher. And it would be the same for a client. So that's one thing to think about. Where values play into this, I think, is also related to goal setting versus simply saying, well, I have this set of values. How does that correlate to my competency model? I think they're two different things. I think that a client can still improve in those, let's say, 6 areas if we're talking about general financial management. But they may have very different values. They may, again, depending on what their, the religious beliefs are, or their cultural beliefs, or what have you, those may be very different. But again, what we found is regardless of kind of what net worth bracket or income bracket you're in, these specific competencies lead to success in financial management. So I'm not sure if that addressed your question or not, but hopefully it added something.
Yeah. So no, I agree 100%, Sarah. And what I take out from what you're saying is, and I think that's the importance of lifestyle financial planning, financial coaching, like you call it executive coaching is where I see the wealth building matrix fitting in, and most probably that's then leads to the next question is to say there's the one part we as financial coaches help our clients to understand, what is that life that they need to create to do the best they can with the resources they have now as well as in the future. However, this part of the wealth building questionnaire is to say, what is those competencies that our clients need? And if I look at it, it's interesting. Prof. Greipel's work is, also on financial anxiety and financial satisfaction. There's a huge correlation for me if I look at these wealth building competencies. How do you see financial advisors use this as part of the financial planning process, the people that's using your product?
Yep. Yeah. So specifically related to the building wealth assessment, we see the most adoption and use with those clients that are new to financial management, relatively new. So I would say younger clients, typically those that are really working to build wealth, they're in an accumulation phase. And they're using this, again, kind of piggybacking on what you said, outside of what's important to you, outside of where do you want to head. This is essentially where the sort of stumbling blocks, if you will, or the guide to get you there. So that's where we see most often this particular assessment being used. Just one quick case study. We had a firm out in California. They were working with a couple. In that household, one of the members of the household was, basically managing their finances. And once they took this assessment, the other spouse was actually much higher across the board on all 6 of these factors. And part of what the advisor worked with them on was actually changing the roles in the household so that the person that has sort of the interest and the competencies for managing their financial life was actually doing that particular job, and it led to a lot greater satisfaction with that couple. It was sort of an eye opener for them. So those are the kinds of ways that the assessment is used, particularly at the beginning of a relationship. In an ongoing relationship, the way that we've seen it be successful is essentially using the tool to begin a coaching program that can be more long-term. So it's not like overnight I'm going to become more confident in my ability to manage my finances. But if you're working with me over a 3 to 6 month period to help me build my knowledge, recognize the decisions that I'm making and how they impact my financial success, that may lead to some demonstrable change. So I would say those are the 2 ways, again, that they're most often, the test is most often used is really at the beginning of a relationship to sort of understand, particularly with couples, where each couple is coming from, each member of the household, I should say, as well as long-term coaching.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yep.
So what I'm hearing is the person with the best competencies, you can make the chief financial officer of the house, and that the other one helps to create memories. Casper, I see you've got a question, and then Francois, you can go after Casper. Casper, over to you.
Yeah, financial planning, like what we know, it is much of a process. So you meet the process and relationship building with the client. I mean, the client has to be comfortable with you as the financial planner. But where do you draw the line between the financial planner, which is me, and then the asset manager or the investment manager? Because I take your money, Sarah, and you want to create wealth, and we're going to invest it somewhere. But that's my part of the job. That's what I've done. We've done the risk analysis. We've done all of that. Where do you differentiate between being a financial planner and doing that, and not stepping over the line trying to do the asset manager's work? If that makes sense, what I'm asking.
I think it does make sense. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would be the best person necessarily to answer that. What I can say is that, typically what we see with the advisors we work with is that they're using one or the other of these assessments. They may use both. And the reason that I mentioned that is trying to sort of address your question of, which sort of hat should I be wearing, and how do I make sure I'm not necessarily going into a different one. But at the same time, we have financial coaches that we work with that will use a multitude of assessments, because here we're not necessarily focused on the mechanics of either the financial plan or the investment strategy. Instead, what we're really focused on is understanding, again, the client competencies. And we've seen financial planners use these tools as well as asset managers in different ways. So I'm not sure I can exactly address your question, other than to say we've seen them being used in a lot of different ways. And therefore, I can imagine that when it comes to assessing competencies, to guiding clients based on their competencies, it's agnostic to what kind of financial plan, or rather what kind of program you're putting in place for that particular client. Casper, I don't know if I answered that question or just made things muddled.
Because the thing is that everybody has a role to play. And I sit with you as my client, and we're busy with wealth creation. You need to plan for retirement. So there's a process. We're looking at the term, you do that whole needs analysis, you do the risk analysis. Where must we place your money? And then markets don't perform, which is not my responsibility, or I have no control over it.
I see.
Then the client comes back and says, "But you, Casper, you said I must invest money, and now I've lost 30% of my income." Pre-COVID, when that whole thing happened, where do you draw the line to say, but it was not my responsibility? It wasn't because of me. It was external factors, because the client always come back to you as the financial planner and say, "Hey, but you recommended this or that." How do you address it, or how do you, where do you draw the line at the end of the day?
I'm not sure.
I think, Dirk, if I can, I see you responded also there in the chat. If you don't mind, I think you've got a very clear view from a lifestyle planner viewpoint on that one. If you don't mind, Dirk, me putting you on the spot, I think you can give a good answer there to Casper.
Very kind of you, Hendrik. Look, I see those, Casper, as two very different jobs of what we're really trying to do. And I think let's call them the money side and the human side, just to simplify them. And really, I think the money side should be very, very simple, because that's probably where we detract more value than we can add if we try and, play the role of an asset manager. So I think we need to build a process that works, that's simple and easy to understand for the client. And I think if the discussions we have about the clients are the things where we can make a difference, in their lifestyles and their decisions, in when they're going through tough times, exactly when markets are down, how they react. I think education around those aspects is where we can really add value, because the reality is, I reckon 80% of advisors who pretend to be asset managers are probably losing more money for their clients than they're making. So I just think it's a big swing we need to make. I think once you make that swing, it becomes obvious and it becomes quite easy. But I'm happy to chat to you about that, on my views on that anytime.
Thanks, Dirk.
Dirk, thank you. Yeah, just to sort of jump in on that piece, one of the factors that is sort of pervasive across a lot of different assessments or models, if you will, is this confidence piece. And part of confidence, and it's in our investing model as well, part of that is helping and educating the client to build, or I should say, to build their knowledge, to build their recognition of how markets work, or again, how finances work in general. ultimately the advisors we have seen, and again, this isn't exactly related to what you were saying, but that are able to educate and build the confidence of their clients, those clients are going to recognize that markets go up and down, that things change. So they become more knowledgeable, and that leads to them understanding that there are many things that you can do, but ultimately you can't control what happens in the market. So I think that that's something to recognize as well. Again, it's not necessarily speaking to that line that you were asking about, but it is speaking to the idea of empowering your clients to recognize and build their knowledge around what happens in the stock market.
Thanks, Dirk, for that input, and thanks also for adding to that conversation, Sarah. Francois, over to you. Mary J, we'll give you an opportunity just now, and also thanks for the chat you put in there.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice seeing so many familiar faces here. Hello, Sarah. Like we've never met, but hello. I have a question. Maybe it's more aimed at you, Hendrik, than Sarah at this point. When it comes to coaching, it's heavily based upon the fact that you know and understand the client extremely well. And a lot of the tools that are being used to do that, or to make it easier and to sort of create an experience and a process, are these different kinds of assessments. And, I look at this assessment, and the question that pops up is sort of two questions. The one is, how is this different from something like Money EQ, for example, and where's each of their place? And how do you decide which tools do you actually use, or which assessments you use when you want to go through something like this? Do you have sort of one tool that you decide on and you stick to, or are there different tools for different kinds of clients that you need to have in your tool belt in order to get the most out of this? So those are sort of my two questions. And if I may quickly add to Casper's question, I think it probably all starts off with setting expectations with the client right from the start. Just my 2 cents. But Hendrik, so sorry, I think that's a question for you, or two questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. I'll have a go at it, and then you can just fill in the gaps there from your point of view. So, Francois, very good question, and I think there's for me something, and Alan Sealer, my mentor at the Ontological Institute, he actually says, he always cautions on assessments, because assessments can also create our own biases as financial coaches and advisors to put somebody into a block. So he always says, rather start seeing each individual that you work with as a unique person. And Sarah also referred it, what is the external things, the beliefs that people come from, and that's the Client's Money script is also one of the Data Points products which they host. Is what is those money scripts that we come for? Listen to those stories of our clients, so that we understand the client's uniqueness and come from that viewpoint. I think that's the one. The other one is that we do not use an assessment like this or any one of the other assessments to put somebody specifically into a box. I think the great thing of any one of these assessments is to help us as financial planners to firstly not put somebody into a box, certainly to spark conversation with a client. And I find a lot of clients find a lot of value out of these assessments just to create a new narrative, because remember, they also haven't got language to express their emotions sometimes around money. If we look at the investor profile, for instance, is how do I express those emotions that come up if markets go up and down? If you look at volatility composure, for instance. So by having a assessment like this, or any one of the other assessments, help us to create a conversational tool for us with our clients over and above, to create awareness. Because I think coming from a coaching viewpoint is also, how do we create awareness for our clients so that they can go on their own journey, and we are just walking alongside them to help them develop. Then to your question is, I think it's a personal preference, is to say, Casper said, financial planning is a process. I think coaching is also a process. Is which of these tools firstly fits into your process and you're comfortable to use them, fits into your practice, because I think all of them addresses different things in different ways. So, I think, and that's also where I think it's important that, like any psychometric assessment in the wrong person's hands, it can be very dangerous. As you need to study yourself into the assessment that you're going to use, because then you're going to add value to the client as well as to your practice. Where if you're just going to take something and just use the language of that assessment and start making judgments, then I don't think it's going to add value, Francois. I don't know, Sarah, you can add to your thoughts to that.
Yeah, I think that a couple things. Definitely agree with you that there are assessments out there, and I'll happy to answer questions about the ones that I do know, that will put clients into a box, and that leads to a lot of inferences that you might make about that client. Think about the Myers-Briggs, for example, and I don't know how you guys feel about that particular assessment. Those of us who are more like more on the competency side view it with a little bit of caution, because it does put someone into one of 16 boxes. Once you're in that box, it means a whole host of things, which may or may not be accurate. And so there are tools out there like that. But I think that I very much agree that it does depend on really the outcome that you're looking for. Are you looking for a tool that is going to open up conversations around something like money scripts? How my client believes or views money based on their background. Is that what you're looking for? Or are you looking for a tool that will help, again, coach them based on, certain characteristics? That's one thing to consider. And then, we have advisors that really stick to one particular assessment. They're comfortable with it. Like you mentioned, they've learned what it measures. They know what a high score means, a low score means. They've had experience with that. And so that's the tool that they choose. And then, other advisors, you really select the assessment based on the client and the situation that client is in. You can think about a client, for example, that has come into money. All of a sudden, they've received a win.
From home or you're in the office.
Uh-oh. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Oh, okay. You can think about a client, Sudden Money, for example, like the Sudden Money Institute here in the US. There are clients that
another introduction document signed.
Whoops. There we go.
No, that's it.
The other advisors or a client that's received a windfall, they may need a different kind of assessment or a different scenario for coaching versus a client that, is more of your traditional client. So I do agree there are different types of assessments. And again, depending on the situation and your practice and what you're comfortable with, that sort of dictates what you need to use. And, in some cases, you may not need to use an assessment with a client. So it really just depends.
Thanks, Sarah.
I thought I'd put up too, and again, just so we can kind of have some things to think about. These are not necessarily the assessments that we do measure a lot of these things in many of our different assessments, but these are things to think about related to the characteristics that your clients bring to the financial coaching or financial planning scenario. So you can think about, how do I understand these things about my clients? It may be that you have a structured interview process that captures some of these. Or you may be looking for, again, a tool, whether it's a form or a survey or, again, a psychometric assessment that uncovers some of these things that then allows you to have a conversation around them. So there are a couple of different ways to really help your client depending on, again, your process, your comfort level, and that kind of thing.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Mary J. Dirk, we're on our way to you.
Awesome. Lower my hand. I thought I had to push the button again. Hi all. I wanted to just share an experience that Marguerite Engelbrecht and I, who work together, have experienced with the clients over the past 7 months. We are taking them through a coached lifestyle financial planning process. So we're doing everything from start to finish. And what's really, really interesting is how when you come with a coaching approach and you spend a lot of time with the clients, meeting them where they're at to start with. So this client was completely emotionally overwhelmed, massive life crisis and transition when they arrived. I mean, tears, and it was quite a difficult, physically uncomfortable conversation for her, the first session that we had. But by having the coaching approach, giving her space to explore and unpack what was going on for her, putting everything on the table, working with her immediate concerns, and slowly nudging her towards, what else, what next. We now, 7 months later, had a session with her where it was like, okay, investments. She's ready to now invest and to look ahead. And a question that Marguerite asked, which was so beautiful, was, is there anything you don't want to invest in? Like anything that would, make you feel uncomfortable? And it triggered an incredible experience and process where the client is now doing her own research on what she would be comfortable and wants to invest in. And she's researching ESG investments and, company sustainability and social transformation and all sorts of things, which traditionally, as an advisor, we would be telling the client where to invest, and we would be giving them our solution and what it is. But here's the client now taking complete ownership. And I suspect that once we have the investments, they're the ones that will have chosen it. Therefore, when it comes to questions like market volatility and performance, really one of the questions and criteria we held was, what's the trade-off between performance and the impact or the social concern that she wants to have around the funds that she chooses. So it's quite incredible when you step back as the expert who knows and would normally tell a client what to do, and let a process unfold and let the client step into the spaces. 7 months ago, she wouldn't have been able to do that. But by meeting her where she was at and working through the things in the way and building her confidence and resiliency in all areas of her life, now she's taking the reins. It's incredible. That was all. Hope that inspires someone to consider bringing the coaching approach into your planning process.
Thanks for sharing that, Mary J. That's just a testimony of the wonderful work you are doing. Dirk, over to you.
Thanks, Hendrik. Sorry, Sarah, I didn't greet you. Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I think what scares a lot of people is, there are more and more these assessments coming out, more tools. And as an advisor, it's quite difficult trying to decide, I think we first got to decide what we want to do. I know Mary well, so I can say Mary's big on the coaching side, and that's kind of where she's come into the industry and found her niche. She can advise and other stuff. And then we have planners who come from the old broking world where it was all product structured and everyone's trying to find where they fit in. And I think the reality is that we're all going to find a place where we're comfortable. And I think if we're honest and care about our clients, we'll be able to add value, and we'll get the clients that are comfortable working with what we have to offer. So I think there's no one size fits all. What's worked really well for us is by building a process. And process sounds really restrictive, but a process can simply be a process that tries to build a similar experience that clients go through, because that's then healthy for the business as a whole, if you're operating as a business versus a one-man show. And then also with these assessments, my kind of feeling is that, to go in with a new client and you can scare them off. You could possibly, before you built a relationship, because, especially in this country where coaching is very new to clients, the conversations they expect to have when they come to a financial planning meeting are very different to what they may expect in perhaps in the States or the UK, Australia. So I think it's really important to, through a process, make clients feel comfortable, build a bit of a relationship. And I think you'll also sense that at a certain time, clients would be ready for this kind of tool to say, okay, well, now let's kind of help you get to another level. But I also think we've got to be careful as to, when do we introduce this? And I think it's difficult for a lot of planners who are trying to become more client focused to kind of fit in, because I think there's one way of doing that. And I just think there really isn't. And we need to, we do counter ourselves and kind of work out what does work for us.
I agree. I think, from what we've seen, particularly with advisors that are successful with these tools and that tend to use them in a process with all clients, particularly at the beginning of a relationship, is that they are very open about the fact that they use them upfront in their marketing materials, in their introductory emails, everything. They're letting the client know that this is part of their process. And that leads to be, less of the surprise factor. They recognize that they'll be asked to go through this. They're given information about why, and that tends to certainly be much more successful than sort of, requesting a meeting with an advisor and then shooting them an invitation to take a 20-minute assessment on investing characteristics, right? We don't have 20-minute assessments, but something like that. So I agree with you. And to your point about process, I think particularly for firms that are, again, that are growing, that are larger, mid-sized firms, there does have to be a sort of go or no go related to the assessments as well. So it can't sort of be what you feel like doing that day. That's probably not going to be the best approach. But there can be some flexibility built in as well. If you have it, to Mary's point, if you had a client that was coming in that was extremely emotional, that would not be the time to start asking them to take really any kind of assessment necessarily, because those results will be probably less than accurate given their emotional state and that kind of thing too.
Thanks, Sarah. I see Yuri has got an interesting question there for us. Sarah, are social indifference and internal locus of control not closely correlated? And so therefore, would an assessment of both of these variables be necessary?
Good questions. They are, slightly related in terms of if you look at the correlations between them, but they aren't the same thing. We define them differently, we measure them differently, and they really are tackling different components. So internal locus of control is essentially, I believe that I control everything that happens. I have, nothing sort of is outside of my control. It can very high scores on internal locus of control can indicate a client that's extremely anxious, particularly when things don't go their way. That's when you see that anxiety increase. But the flip side of that is that those that are high on internal locus of control, again, I believe I can impact my financial future, is that tends to be correlated highly with financial success, particularly net worth, financial satisfaction. Social indifference, on the other hand, is essentially looking at the client's ability to ignore the trends and the Joneses around them when it comes to purchasing decisions primarily, so consumer decisions, but also related to investing. And so you could have clients that are high on internal locus of control. I control everything, while at the same time, they are also interested in following trends and almost unconsciously keeping up with their neighbors and their friends and those on social media. But there is a correlation between those two factors, but they're pretty different. And you can think about too the way that you might coach someone on either of those factors. That there would be really a different strategy for that. If you have a client that has high, what we would call external locus of control, they believe that everything that happens to them is someone else's fault or is something that happened in my past and I can't control it. You can think about sort of the strategy you might use with that particular client versus a client that is very focused on what everyone else is doing. Those would be different conversations that you would be having with that particular client. So great question though, because they are, when you look at the research, they are correlated, but they are different components.
Yuri, perhaps a thought that you want to add or ask on that one?
No, thanks here for that that explanation. Yeah, it's maybe just on my side. I had a bit of a narrower interpretation of internal locus of control. I think you defined that as a lot broader. But just to say, when I saw the determinants of success on managing your finances on that wheel diagram that you had there,
yeah.
and I saw the that's it, the social
Yep.
indifference. That certainly rang true. So I just like that.
Yep. Yeah, we get some pushback on the label because it sounds so negative, right? It sounds like I'm uncaring or but it really is focused on consumption and financial decisions. So thank you. Yeah, great question.
Sarah, I think another point that I want to touch on perhaps is looking at the data point solution perhaps is, it's one thing to do a financial assessment for a client, then putting some coaching practices in place. However, because I also see this as a product, using assessment like this is deepening that relationship with your client over time, because you'll help your client building competency. Depending on the competency, and as you put it on that slide, also the indifferent or the difference between spouses and the relationships. And I see spousal congruence is a huge thing I see it a lot. Is how do you see advisors keeping track and perhaps building in some nudges to support clients to creating that value to, because it's something, it's not overnight. It's a new muscle that must be built. It's a new language that must be created. It's a new mood that must be created. How do you see advisors doing it, and what have you put over the years into place to support financial planners with that?
Right. One of the things that struck me several years ago when we started on this journey of data points was the fact that, many of the metrics that you might show to a client are in some ways out of your control, kind of what we were talking about before, right? So you're showing them success, but in some cases, you don't have much to do with that. And so how could you show sort of change over time related to some of these behavioral components or even satisfaction and things like that? So we see that in a couple of ways. So certainly if part of what you measure today includes a measure of financial satisfaction upfront, whether that's a short measure that you've created yourself or some kind of form, or again, if you're using one of our assessments, you can actually demonstrate change over time by reassessing after 6 to 12 months and showing them that there's, look, you're feeling better about the future, you're feeling better about your current situation, if that's the case. And so we've put that in place in our platform so that you can actually compare those scores over time and show, percentages increased related to, let's say, attitudes about investing or something like that. But again, whether you're using our tools or you're using your own, you can create ways of essentially taking what you might think of as being subjective and adding some metrics to it. Satisfaction is a great place to start. So, again, think about the example that Mary shared. If she had to go back and show time 1, satisfaction, wellness, and then showed that 7 months later, 12 months later, that would be an amazing, metric to show. Of course, again, it depends on how you would measure that. But that's one thing that we've done at Data Points is we've included the ability to retest, to show change over time, and add that as a tool that the advisor can use in addition to showing other kinds of other kind of monetary type improvements as well.
Thank you. I see Alice has got a question here, which is a broad question. I do not see health. Is it under lifestyle? Because your health is also investment. Health can change all your investment decisions. Yeah, and I see that most probably in the 100-year life, that's one of the things is not looking just at tacit assets, but also looking at health as well as then the competencies. I think that's the one thing that the research from the 100-year life show us. So yeah, your views perhaps on that one, Sarah.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's not something that we have tackled yet in our assessments. So we don't necessarily have a component that looks at health. Likewise, we don't have a component that looks at stage of life necessarily. I think that we've made the assumption really up until late last year that those were components handled by, let's say, like the financial planning software. But what we're recognizing is that the financial planning software really stops at financial planning. There's no components that are assessing, let's say, satisfaction with, parenthood and things like that. So I think it's a great question. It's not something that we have today. It's certainly something that we've see the need for and are considering in the future, but it's a great question.
The one thing that I was pondering on looking at confidence and frugality next to each other, do you see any relationship between the two? Because, and why I'm asking is we saw from the work that Morningstar did last year and published last year that people that's overconfident, and you also touch on that in your reports, tend to also overspend, being over-optimistic in terms of the future, etc. Do you see a relationship between those two, Sarah, in the research you've done, as well as, the feedback most probably, because the best research is all the data that you get back from all the assessments that's being done. So.
Right. So we used to call confidence effective confidence, and we actually scored it differently to essentially remove or the attempt was, and again, this was an early version of this test. The goal there was to remove scores or kind of the overconfidence factor from confidence. But I agree. If you have a client and if you look at a profile, and I don't have an example to show necessarily, but and I'll scoot through some slides and see if I do. If you have a client, let's say, that's high on confidence, but low on everything else, that tends to be the hallmark of an overconfident client. So they're extremely confident, but they're not very frugal. They're distracted. They're very interested in what everybody else is doing. They spend very little time planning, and they, essentially believe that everything's out of their control, which that probably wouldn't necessarily be the case. Again, just as an example, that would be a client that would be a real challenge to work with. We do see, though, that there is a correlation between confidence and frugality. So these things are correlated. That's why we have that one score, what we call wealth potential. We're able to create a composite score. So there is a slight correlation, just like the other factors. But we know that when confidence is high and the rest are generally medium to low, that can be an overconfident client.
On confidence, and then moving to the investment profile, I see specifically in the report you also touch on some of the behavioral biases. How do you see the behavioral biases impacting, and do they differ based on the report that you on the scores that comes from the report? And how do you see that? Because I think that's the important thing for a financial planner, to support the coaching process, because that helps us, to understand what is that fallback or thinking fast part that is going to kick in when things aren't going according to plan, or in terms of thinking about my investments, because that's that part that comes naturally for me as a client.
Right. Yep. So where we see clients kind of latching on, or I say latching on, using biases in decision making, cognitive, or where cognitive biases sort of begin or are often prevalent, is when the client tends to be more emotional. So that's that volatility composure component. If they're low on that component, at the same time, they're extremely high on confidence, we often see behavioral biases come into play. So part of the research that we are doing now is actually correlating some of the biases like herd mentality and those kinds of things to our profiles. Because we have had advisors ask for like specific lists of the biases. And, what we can tell you is that a client that looks like, again, low volatility composure, high confidence, that's sort of a recipe for engaging in some of those biases in decision making. So I can't say, well, client X is going to do, is going to feel a lot of loss and be, upset by that. But I can say that, again, if they're, if they don't have a ton of, if they don't have the ability to stay cool when the markets are going crazy and they tend to be overconfident, then that is the client that's going to often be the one that's going to engage in those, biases.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That more or less nearly brings us to the end of our conversation. So if some of the advisors want to get in contact with you, where do they get in contact with you? And your American product with a dollar disparity to South Africa, right. How do you deal with that? So yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll send it through in the chat, just how you can get in touch with me, with us. We've created a pricing for the South African market. Unfortunately, it's still represented in US dollars. I'll put that up too. Happy to answer any questions that you guys have about our assessments, or if you're interested in them, or if you just have questions like, hey, I really do want to measure satisfaction at time 1, time 2, I'm happy to answer that too. That's the email address, just generally for us. And then for me, happy to answer questions. If you want to try out our assessments, you're welcome to do that too. We have a free 2-week trial. You can, we always say, test your friends, test your clients, and see if they make sense for you. But there are a lot of tools out there, and I'll put that up too. And would be, love for you guys to try them out and share your feedback with us.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. It was really nice engaging with you. Thanks for everybody on the call, your questions, your engagement. That makes this fun and also a wonderful learning experience. So really appreciate your attendance as well as the engagement. So all of the best. And I'll be in contact and share with you who is going to engage with us in our next coaching circle last Monday of the month, of this month. Or the coming month. And all of the best for your businesses. And thanks again, Sarah, for your time, and looking forward to engage with you as we go through the year.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you guys.